listening to the Truck Talk with Trivista podcast, brought to you by TrivistaCompanies.com, the ultimate source for all things trucking. I'm Anita Massey, Director of Marketing for Trivista Companies. Thanks for joining us. Today our topic is eliminating FET, also known as Federal Excise Tax. This is a hot-button topic for many folks in the truck, trailer, and heavy equipment industry, and for good reason. It's outdated, no longer relevant, and detrimental to the entire truck, trailer, and heavy equipment industry. We'll be talking more about Bill H.R. 2381, designed to repeal this antiquated tax, and much more. Today we'll be joined by John Shireman, President of Wool Truck Sales, one of the many dealerships within the Trivista Company, and George Brewster, a longtime veteran of the trucking industry, a former truck driver, owner-operator, mechanic, dispatcher, and now a salesman for Trivista. Welcome, gentlemen. It's great to have you here to discuss this important topic.
Thanks, Anita. Happy to be here.
Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. Well, let's dive right in, guys. This is a long-standing, burdensome tax, and it dates back more than a century ago. So I guess let's start at the beginning and talk about how this whole thing got started. John, can you talk a little bit about the reason for this federal excise tax?
Sure, Anita. So FET was first enacted by Congress in 1917. So if my math is correct, that is over 102 years ago. And there has been a lot that has changed over the past 102 years, but this tax is still alive and well. So the purpose of FET has very noble beginnings, and it was developed to offset the cost of WW1, but World War I has been over for 100 years. A couple of other things that you need to take into consideration is that FET is the highest percentage base tax that the federal government collects. And this thing has risen 300% since it began. And on average, it can add more than 20 grand to the cost of a new heavy-duty truck or trailer. Now, something that we'll probably talk about a little bit later and throughout this podcast is just the sheer complexity of this. But just to stay on subject, I'll tell you what it applies to. So this tax applies to truck chassis and bodies, along with truck trailers and semi-trailers. And what you also need to consider is that the FET tax is in addition to the nearly 40,000 in federal emissions and fuel economy mandates that really became prevalent back in 2007. So you couple those mandates with that FET tax, and it makes it really hard for small businesses to afford a new heavy-duty truck.
Yeah, John, and it's like you said, the FET is really, it's a lot of hurdles to get over to buy a new truck. A lot of folks would rather buy older, used equipment that's not as efficient, is more polluting, and this has all the problems associated with that. And because it's based on annual sales, the tax fails to provide the funds for the Highway Trust Fund that they need to do their job every year. It's really something that's got to go.
Yeah, and George, if I could just spend a second and expand on that complexity. Just a couple of offices down in our general manager's office, there are 5 binders specifically related to FET and the interpretation and all the different mandates that have to do with that. There's probably 600 to 700 pages of documents that we have to look at in order to really figure this thing out.
So who pays this tax, John, the buyer or the seller?
Well, good question. So the seller, in this case Wool Truck Sales, collects the tax, but the buyer is liable for the tax on the first retail sale. So, I mean, that's easy to understand, right? But check this out. I'm going to have to read this part. Okay. The tax does not apply to truck bodies and chassis that have a gross vehicle weight of 33,000 pounds or less. It also does not apply to truck, trailer, and semi-trailer bodies and chassis that are suitable for use with vehicles that have a gross vehicle weight of 26,000 pounds or less. So, I mean, just take a second to ponder that sentence. I mean, I'm confused on how to interpret that, and I'm a truck dealer.
Exactly.
So we're talking about different weight classes, different equipment, and terms like suitable for use standards. It just gets pretty confusing.
So you're right, it does sound very confusing. So who do you turn to for advice when you're looking to determine what qualifies for FET?
So what I typically do is I contact an association that has experts that are available for us to ask those questions. And I pay a pretty hefty premium for that membership, but it's completely worth it because, as mentioned earlier, I have all these binders that we can look at, but it's up to different interpretations. So I will call the organization, and 9 times out of 10, they have to call me back because they have to research it, and they're the experts.
Exactly. So what would you say the classifications of truck body types are that meet the suitable for use standard?
So just in the spirit of full disclosure, I got to read this too, because there are certain things that I cannot commit to memory. So, all right, it's going to be platform truck bodies that are 21 feet or less in length, dry freight and refrigerated truck van bodies 24 foot or less in length, dump truck bodies with load capacities of 8 cubic yards or less, and packer truck bodies with load capacities of 20 cubic yards or less. So, to my point, there's a lot of complexity here.
Yeah, a lot of detail for sure. I can see where it would get tricky. So, we're audited every year, right?
Sometimes, at least every other year. And that's another interesting thing to talk about. You know, the FET tax makes it difficult for truck dealers who have high annual sales because we get audited. If you look at some of the smaller facilities, they're probably not going to manage FET like we do. So there are many times, and I could cite several examples to where it's just not a fair playing field, that a customer will purchase from a small dealer or an independent that's just not going to charge them FET. But the big dealers, the legitimate ones, cannot get away from that.
So the ones that are, gambling, I guess, if they do get audited, though, they'll be fined.
They will
or
be.
Possibly shut down.
Yep, they will definitely be fined.
Okay. So, George, if this 12% FET tax were abolished, I'm assuming those funds could then be freed up for the trucking industry to use for things like updating their fleets, adopting safety equipment, and, adopting emerging green technologies at a faster pace, right?
Yes, that's correct. It really discourages fleets from upgrading to the latest safety and pollution control devices out there that are available right now, and they'll hold on to trucks until they actually get to the point of being unsafe, and that discourages drivers from wanting to come work for these people, and they're burning more fuel, putting more crap in the air. It's really, when you're talking about $20,000 on top of already pricey piece of equipment, that's hard to overcome.
Yeah, no kidding. Well, obviously this is a pretty big deal, and I know that there are many organizations involved in this push to abolish this tax. In January of this year, a group formed a coalition called MTF, which stands for Modernize the Truck Fleet. And this coalition consists of road builders, trucking companies, and logistics and manufacturing industries. John, can you explain what Trivista Company's involvement has been in this repeal effort?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the Trivista partners and the CEO of Trivista is Jim O'Halloran. And Jim is very involved in several associations, but one of those associations is the Iowa Automobile Dealer Association. So he, along with 3 other Iowa-based truck dealers, they traveled to Washington, D.C. this past spring, and there's an annual American Truck Dealers Washington fly-in. So in this, they participate, and what they do is they bring attention to this bipartisan legislation. Also, standalone legislation has been introduced called H.R. 2381, and this is known as the Modern, Clean, and Safe Trucks Act of 2019. It's meant to repeal the FET on heavy trucks, truck bodies, and trailers. And the House bill has 23 bipartisan co-sponsors, which is really good.
That's huge.
I know, it really is. And the enactment of this bill would directly benefit the 7.4 million Americans employed in trucking-related jobs.
Wow.
And the coalition sent a letter to Congress urging the repeal of this tax. In addition to the MTF Coalition, other groups signed a letter, including the Agricultural and Food Transporters, ATA, Associated Equipment Distributors, American Road and Transportation Builders, Automobile Carriers, Baker Commodities, Motor and Equipment Manufacturers Association, NAFA Fleet Management Association, National Association of Chemical Distributors, National Private Truck Council, National Retail Federation, Recreational Vehicle Dealers Association, RV Industry Association, and Truck Trailer Manufacturers Association.
My goodness, that is an impressive broad segment of America's trucking industry that's uniting together. I believe the H.R. 2381 bill has also been referred to the House Ways and Means Committee for consideration as well. So John, can you talk a little bit about what Jim O'Halloran and the rest of his fellow Iowa Automobile Dealers Association members did while they were in D.C.?
Yeah, I talked to Jim about that when he got back, and it was action-packed. They were meeting with people just the whole time we were there, and that included several senators, representatives, and staff members from Rep. Cindy Axney's office. So 2 of these senators hold key positions on committees relevant to the FET legislation. So they spent a lot of time going over that. And the reason for that is because Jim and the rest of the dealers that were there, along with every truck dealer I talked to, realized that this is a big deal. It's a big deal to the trucking industry because if we eliminate this 12% tax, it's going to allow purchasers to more readily integrate cleaner and safer vehicles. George mentioned that a little earlier, but we may talk about it later, but vehicles are so much different today. I mean, the safety features that they have are just unbelievable. And to get trucks of this nature, these newer models into fleets, is going to be a big deal. And it's also going to clear the way to better alternative funding mechanisms for highway repair and maintenance.
So I'm assuming then that the OEMs are also heavily involved in this repeal effort. Can you talk a little bit about the actions Navistar is currently taking to help abolish this tax?
Yeah, absolutely. So you mentioned earlier, both you and George, a coalition called MTF. So Navistar, along with other OEMs and engine manufacturers, are heavily involved in this organization, and they're campaigning on how important it is to abolish this tax. So we talked about some bipartisan efforts. What's nice about this coalition is you have some really heavy competitive OEMs that are getting together on this, and they're working together to do what they can to abolish it.
So what will this mean then for UL truck sales dealerships, our different locations, and Trivista companies as a whole if this bill doesn't pass? Will it just be business as usual?
You know, Anita, that's one way you can put it, and really that's what it would be. You know, we've been dealing with the complexities of this tax since our inception in 1953, and there were people dealing with it long before that as well. So yes, if this does not get passed, we as a dealer are going to continue to put a lot of time and resources into collecting this and accounting for it and making sure that we cross all those T's and dot those I's because, as mentioned, we get audited frequently.
Exactly. So George, I'm curious, being in the sales world now, are you seeing where this FET is affecting your sales efforts with your customers?
Yes, I sold trucks last year to 2 customers that had never purchased a new vehicle, and one of them had been in business since the 1950s.
Wow.
And when they got that sticker shock of that FET, that made my efforts that much more difficult.
Were they aware of the tax when you told them?
And, well, I made them aware of it before, it's something you want to discuss before you sign here and then.
Exactly.
Yeah, you don't want them backing out, of course. But, yeah, it's just a very big hurdle to overcome for a lot of people, and it's kind of a kick in the butt because only the first-time buyer is being charged this.
Right.
And, it makes people want to go buy a used truck instead. And when you don't have the blind spot monitoring, the radar, the adaptive cruise control, the rollover prevention, the increased fuel economy, all the benefits that come with these newest vehicles. The latest trucks are amazing.
They are.
And they are light years better than anything that was made 5-10 years ago.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
So, George, what about air quality? With all the talk, about needing to decrease air pollution, why would the government still allow trucking companies to buy glider kits and push them to reuse these older, less efficient engines?
Well, in defense of the trucking industry, when they first came out with the pollution control that's on the trucks now, it was like anything else. It was new technology. It didn't work great. There was a lot of growing pains. we're past that now. All these, DEF type systems work fantastic. They go for 500,000 miles before you have to do anything to them. And but because of all that problem in the first part of it, people didn't want to jump into this new technology and deal with it. So they would buy a glider kit, put an older engine in there, and not have those problems. But with the quality of the pollution control that we've got on these trucks now and the safety features that are available, we need to get rid of this FET to encourage these companies to come in and purchase these newer, cleaner trucks. And, if you stop and think about it, especially us here in the Louisville area, in the Ohio Valley, you've got people dealing with asthma and other breathing problems, and cleaner trucks means less problems that way and fewer people developing breathing problems.
Yeah, that's true. I guess it would help all those people, and we're kind of known as the Ohio Valley crud, so I'm sure it would help with that as well. So aside from just the astronomical dollars lost aspect, this tax must be having an overall negative effect on just the trucking industry's efficiency too, right, John?
Yeah, absolutely. So given that nearly all of America's products are hauled some point by trucks, right? Mm-hmm. And with the driver shortage dilemma that we're currently experiencing, I hear about that every day. I hear accounts of mine say, John, I'll be happy to buy a truck, but it needs to come with a driver. I mean, there is a huge problem with that currently. So given that, you'd think that the federal government would want as few problems as possible. So trucking companies who have newer fleets have far fewer breakdowns and a much better driver retention. And the FET tax forces trucking companies to hang on to these old trucks like we've been talking about. They got to hold on to them a lot longer than they should. So therefore, there are going to be more breakdowns. And you're going to have that, service issues, downtime. It's a mess. And nothing drives a trucker away faster than continually experiencing that downtime when he can't be earning money.
Yeah, no kidding. And that obviously defeats our goal of delivering maximum uptime. We don't want that. So, well, guys, we're about out of time today. Is there anything else you'd like to share on this subject that we haven't covered today?
Well, Anita, I think the three of us made a very good case on why FET needs to be abolished or heavily reformed. I shouldn't even say that. Let's just stick with abolished right now. It's important for truck fleets and owner-operators to be encouraged to get into late model equipment. I think we've definitely made a case for that because if you just look at the safety improvements and how those have dramatically changed. And that can be difficult to do. It can be difficult to accomplish that if we can't take this tax out of the equation.
Yes, and the FET, it's outdated, needs to go away. And having been on the other side of the trucking industry as an owner, I know the road taxes that these trucks pay every year, and those funds are being diverted to other things, and that's wrong. The government needs to use those funds to do what they are designated for, to take care of our infrastructure and if you do away with the FET, you're going to have better equipment out there that's going to be safer, less polluting. I mean, it's a win-win for everybody. It's something that really needs to happen.
That makes sense, George. Well, John and George, this has been an enlightening conversation, and I really appreciate you taking the time to sit with me and educate our listeners on what this tax is all about. Hopefully the momentum is going to continue to build on the repeal of this tax. It's obviously hurting the trucking industry. And I think we may just have to do an update at some point as this bill works its way through the halls of D.C. So I'm asking now, can I count on you guys to come back?
Most definitely.
George, you in?
No problem. Anytime.
All right. Well, we hope you've enjoyed this edition of the Truck Talk with Trivista podcast. You can find more podcast talks or general information about Trivista Companies and its many dealerships at trivistacompanies.com. Until next time, be safe out there.